In this video, we unravel the incredible true story of one woman's fight for survival in the vast, unforgiving Pacific Ocean. She set sail alone, chasing a dream, but just days into her voyage, that dream turned into a harrowing nightmare. After a critical failure left her drifting with no engine, no communications, and no help in sight, she was forced to survive 47 days completely alone at sea. How did she manage to endure storms, hunger, and total isolation? What choices did she make that kept her alive when all odds were against her? And what happened after those 47 days that shocked everyone? We're diving deep into her survival story, an emotional, technical, and deeply human journey that reveals not only her resilience, but also the life-saving lessons every sailor needs to hear. From makeshift navigation to water rationing, every decision mattered. This isn't just a story, it's a wake-up call for sailors around the world. So make sure you stay with us until the very end, because what she learned out there might just save your life one day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss more incredible real-life tales from the open sea. Let's begin. The salt stung her lips, cracked and raw from days under the relentless sun, as Sarah leaned over the rail of Starlight, her 35-foot sloop, and stared into the endless churn of the Pacific. The ocean stretched in every direction, a liquid infinity that shimmered with the promise of freedom and the threat of oblivion. She had left San Francisco 12 days ago, her heart pounding with the thrill of the challenge. A solo crossing to Hawaii, 2,400 nautical miles of open water, just her, the boat, and the vast unknown. The Starlight was her sanctuary, her companion, a Pacific Seacraft 37 with a fiberglass hull, a fin keel, and a spade rudder built for the long haul. Its aluminum mast stood proud, supporting a mainsail and roller-furling jib, with a storm jib and spinnaker stowed below for emergencies. She had checked every inch of the rigging, stainless steel cables with swag terminals, before departure, her hands tracing the stays and shrouds as if they were lifelines to her soul. Sarah was no novice. At 35, she had sailed the California coast, tackled the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and spent countless nights under the stars, learning the language of the wind. But this was different. The Pacific was a beast, a living thing that whispered promises and roared threats. She had plotted her course to catch the trade winds, aiming for a steady 5 knots westward, her GPS and chart plotter humming softly in the cockpit. In her cabin, a sextant, nautical almanac, and paper charts waited as backups, alongside a wind-up clock for celestial navigation. Her VHF radio crackled occasionally, though she was far beyond its range now. A satellite phone and an EPIRB hung on a bulkhead, silent sentinels of safety. She had provisions for 30 days, canned beans, rice, pasta, energy bars, and 2 large water tanks supplemented by a manual desalinator. A lifer raft, flares, a signaling mirror, and a first aid kit completed her preparations. She was ready, or so she thought. The first week had been exhilarating. The Starlight sliced through the waves, the mainsail taut, the jib catching the breeze like a lover's sigh. Sarah felt alive, her hands calloused but steady on the tiller, her eyes scanning the horizon for signs of weather. She sang sea shanties to herself, her voice swallowed by the wind, and wrote in her logbook each night, the pencil scratching against the paper as she recorded her position, her thoughts, her dreams. The stars were her ceiling, brighter than she'd ever seen, and the ocean's rhythm became her heartbeat. But on the 9th day, the air grew heavy, the horizon darkened, and the barometer began to drop. A storm was coming. She reefed the mainsail early, reducing its area to brace for the wind, and swapped the jib for the storm jib, a smaller, tougher sail designed for gales. The Starlight pitched as the swells grew, waves curling like fists against the hull. By nightfall, the storm hit with a fury she hadn't anticipated. Winds howled at 40 knots, gusting higher, and the sea became a chaos of whitecaps and foam. Sarah clipped her harness to the jack lines, the safety lines running along the deck, and fought to keep the boat on course. The Starlight climbed waves that seemed to touch the sky, then plummeted into troughs that felt like graves. She was soaked, her oilskins no match for the deluge, and her muscles ached from bracing against the motion. Then it happened. A gust slammed the boat, and a sickening crack split the air. The mast, her proud aluminum spine, buckled under the strain. A forward stay, likely weakened by unseen corrosion, had snapped, and the mast folded at a grotesque angle, 10 feet above the deck. The mainsail tore, flapping wildly, and the rigging tangled like a spider's web gone mad. Sarah's heart stopped as she watched her propulsion, her lifeline, collapse. She lunged for the cockpit, her hands fumbling for the knife strapped to her belt, but a wave knocked her against the companionway. Her head struck the edge, pain exploding behind her eyes, and she felt warm blood trickle down her temple. Her ribs screamed as she gasped, the impact bruising her side. She lay there for a moment, stunned, the boat rolling beneath her as the storm raged on. When she came to, the world was a blur of pain and noise. The mast was still attached, dragging in the water, threatening to punch a hole in the hull. She crawled to the deck, her harness tether keeping her secure, and began the agonizing task of cutting it free. Her bolt cutters, stored in the lazarette, bit through the stainless steel shrouds, each snap a small victory against the chaos. The mast splashed into the sea, taking the mainsail and most of the rigging with it. The Starlight rocked, suddenly lighter but directionless, at the mercy of the waves. Sarah secured the deck, her hands shaking, and stumbled below to assess the damage. The cabin was a mess, charts scattered, a water jug overturned. The engine, a 30-horsepower diesel inboard, refused to start, its compartment flooded from a wave that had breached the hatch. The GPS and chart plotter were dead, likely shorted out by water ingress. Her satellite phone flickered but wouldn't connect. The VHF was useless this far out. Only the EPIRB remained, but activating it felt like admitting defeat. She wasn't ready for that, not yet. The storm passed by dawn, leaving a bruised sky and a sea that still heaved with memory. Sarah sat in the cockpit, her head bandaged with gauze from the first aid kit, her ribs throbbing with every breath. The Starlight drifted, carried by the Pacific's currents, no longer a vessel of purpose, but a speck in the vastness. She took stock. The spinnaker pole, a lightweight aluminum spar, was intact. The storm jib, stowed below, was undamaged. She had food, water, and a desalinator, but her navigation tools were limited to the sextant, almanac, and her faltering clock. She could try to jury-rig a sail, but without a proper mast, progress would be slow, and she was injured. Her head wound was shallow but needed watching, and her ribs made every movement a test of will. She felt the weight of her solitude, the ocean's indifference pressing against her chest. She began with the spinnaker pole. It was shorter than the main mast, maybe 12 feet, but it could serve as a makeshift rig. She lashed it to the stump of the original mast, using halyards and spare lines to secure it, her fingers raw from the effort. The storm jib, a triangle of heavy dacron, was hanked onto a spare forestay she salvaged from the wreckage. It wasn't pretty, but it caught the wind, giving the Starlight a sluggish forward motion, maybe one knot if she was lucky. She adjusted the tiller, trying to steer west, but the boat crabbed sideways, fighting the current. The North Pacific current, she knew, was pulling her north and west, possibly toward the shipping lanes, but also toward nowhere. She had studied ocean currents before the trip, memorizing their patterns on her charts, but without precise navigation, she was guessing. Navigation became her obsession. The GPS was gone, so she turned to the sextant, a brass instrument that felt like a relic from another age. At noon, when the sun was highest, she stood on the pitching deck, her ribs protesting, and sighted the sun's altitude through the sextant's telescope. She adjusted the index arm until the sun's lower limb kissed the horizon, then noted the angle. Back in the cabin, she consulted the nautical almanac, calculating her latitude with the formula. Latitude equals 90 degrees minus the sun's altitude plus its declination. Without a reliable chronometer, longitude was harder. She used the wind-up clock, but its accuracy was questionable, and her dead reckoning, estimating position based on speed and course, was a gamble. She plotted her fixes on a paper chart, the pencil trembling in her hand, each mark a fragile hope. Days blurred into nights. The Starlight crept along under its jury rig, the storm jib flapping in the trade winds. Sarah rationed her food, eating one meal a day, beans, rice, or a single energy bar, savoring each bite as if it were a sacrament. She collected rainwater with a tarp, funneling it into jugs, and used the desalinator when the skies were dry. She tried fishing, trailing a line with a lure, but the fish were elusive and her strength was waning. Her head wound, scabbed over, but her ribs burned, making sleep a restless dance on the narrow bunk. She talked to herself, to the boat, to the stars, her voice a thin thread against the silence. The ocean was her world now, its moods her only calendar. A pod of dolphins swam alongside one morning, their clicks and leaps a fleeting gift, but they vanished, leaving her alone again. The loneliness was a weight, heavier than the storms. She wrote in her logbook, the words spilling out like a confession. Day 15, saw a ship on the horizon. Too far, waved my jacket, but they didn't see. I'm still here, Starlight. We're still here. She imagined her family, her friends, the life she'd left behind. Had they given up on her? The EPIRB hung on the bulkhead, its red button a temptation, but activating it meant surrender, and Sarah wasn't ready to let the ocean win. She remembered her father, a sailor himself, telling her, "The sea doesn't care, but it teaches you to." She clung to that, to the idea that this struggle was forging something unbreakable inside her. By day 20, her body was a map of aches, her mind a fog of fatigue. The jury rig held, but progress was agonizing. She estimated she was drifting at 1.5 knots, covering maybe 36 miles a day, but the currents were unpredictable. The California current might be pushing her south, or the North Pacific current north. She couldn't be sure. Her charts showed shipping lanes far to the west, where cargo ships traced great circle routes between Asia and North America. If she could reach them, she might be seen. But the ocean was vast and her boat was small, a needle in a haystack of waves. She began to notice the Starlight's leaks. The hull, battered by the storm, let in small amounts of water, and she pumped the bilge daily with the manual pump, each stroke a reminder of her fragility. The desalinator clogged once, forcing her to disassemble it with trembling hands, cleaning the filters by moonlight. She caught a fish on day 25, a small mahi-mahi, and wept as she ate it raw, the taste of life sharp on her tongue. The stars remained her only constant, their patterns a map she could trust. She named them, Orion her protector, Sirius her guide, and talked to them when the silence grew too loud. On day 30, a new storm loomed, smaller but fierce. She secured the jury rig, double-checking the lashings, and hove to, setting the storm jib and tiller to keep the Starlight stable. The waves tossed her, but the boat held, its hull groaning but unyielding. She curled in the cabin, her ribs a dull ache, and prayed, not to a god, but to the boat, to the sea, to herself. The storm passed and she emerged to find the jury rig intact, the Starlight still afloat. She laughed, a brittle sound, and wrote in her log, "We're tougher than we look." By day 40, hope was a flicker. Her food was dwindling, her water jugs half empty. She rationed tighter, her stomach a knot of hunger. Her ribs still hurt, but she moved with grim determination, checking the rigging, pumping the bilge, taking sextant readings. She saw ships twice more, distant specks that never saw her signals. She waved her bright orange life jacket, flashed her signaling mirror, but the horizon stayed empty. The ocean was a mirror of her solitude, reflecting her smallness back at her. Yet she kept going, driven by a stubborn fire she didn't fully understand. The Starlight was her partner, its creaks and groans, a language she'd learned to read. She patted the hull, whispering, "We'll make it, girl." On day 47, the horizon changed. A dark shape, not a wave, not a cloud. A ship, a cargo freighter, its hull a slab of steel against the blue. Sarah's heart leapt, her hands scrambling for the signaling mirror. She stood on the foredeck, her ribs screaming, and angled the mirror to catch the sun, flashing light toward the ship. Once, twice, 3 times. Her arms shook, her vision blurred with tears. The ship turned, slowly, impossibly. They'd seen her. She sank to her knees, the mirror slipping from her hand, and sobbed. Relief, exhaustion, gratitude crashing over her like a wave. The Starlight rocked gently, as if nodding in approval. They had survived. The freighter loomed like a steel mountain, its bow cutting through the Pacific swell as it bore down on the Starlight. Sarah stood on the foredeck, her legs trembling, the signaling mirror still clutched in her hand. The sun's reflection danced across the waves, a fragile thread connecting her to salvation. Her ribs ached, her head throbbed beneath a makeshift bandage, but her heart pounded with a wild, desperate hope. She waved the orange life jacket, its color a scream against the blue, and shouted, her voice hoarse and lost in the wind. The freighter's horn blared, a deep bellow that shook her bones, and she sank to her knees, tears streaming down her salt-crusted face. After 47 days adrift, the ocean was releasing her. The freighter, a Panamanian-registered behemoth named Pacific Dawn, slowed its engines, its massive hull dwarfing the Starlight. Sarah watched as a small boat was lowered, its outboard motor buzzing as it approached. She clipped her harness to the jackline, a habit now etched into her muscles, and prepared to abandon her boat. The Starlight bobbed beside her, its jury-rigged spinnaker pole and tattered storm jib a testament to their shared ordeal. She patted the hull, whispering, "You got me this far, girl. I'll come back for you." The promise felt hollow. She didn't know if she could keep it, but it was all she had to give. The rescue boat reached her, and two crew members, their faces weathered but kind, shouted in accented English, "Are you okay? Can you climb?" Sarah nodded, though her body protested. She grabbed the lifer raft's painter line, securing it to a cleat, and tossed her logbook and a small bag of essentials, her almanac, sextant, and a photo of her family, into the rescue boat. With agonizing effort, she climbed down the Starlight's boarding ladder, each rung a stab to her ribs. A crew member steadied her, his grip firm, and she collapsed onto the boat's bench, her strength spent. As they motored back to the freighter, she looked back at the Starlight, alone and drifting, its hull a speck against the endless sea. Her heart twisted, a mix of gratitude and grief. Aboard the Pacific Dawn, the crew wrapped her in a blanket, their voices a blur of concern and curiosity. The ship's medic, a gruff man with gentle hands, cleaned her head wound and taped her ribs, diagnosing a mild concussion and bruised ribs, but no fractures. She sipped water, the first fresh gulp in days, and ate a bowl of rice, the warmth spreading through her like a memory of home. The captain, a weathered Filipino named Marcos, sat with her in the mess hall, his eyes crinkling as he listened to her story. 47 days, he said, shaking his head. "You're a tough one." Sarah managed a weak smile, her mind still on the Starlight. She gave them her position, her last sextant fix, shaky as it was, and begged them to note the Starlight's location. Marcos promised to radio the coordinates to the Coast Guard, but warned her the boat might be lost to the currents. The North Pacific Current, he said, could carry it hundreds of miles in days. Sleep came in fits, her dreams a tangle of waves and stars. She woke to the hum of the freighter's engines, a steady vibration unlike the Starlight's gentle rocking. The crew treated her like a miracle, offering her coffee, clothes, even a bunk in the officers' quarters. She felt like a ghost, caught between the life she'd left and the one she'd fought to keep. Her logbook became her anchor, its pages filled with pencil scrawls, positions, wind speeds, her thoughts as she drifted. She read them, reliving the moments, the storm that broke the mast, the jury rig she'd lashed together, the fish she'd caught and eaten raw, its blood staining her hands. Each entry was a piece of her survival, a map of her resilience. The Pacific Dawn was bound for Yokohama, but Marcos arranged for a detour to Honolulu, the closest port. Sarah spent the days on the freighter's bridge, watching the crew navigate with radar and AIS, systems she'd never needed on the Starlight. She learned her drift had carried her nearly 1,700 miles, far north of her intended route, caught in the gyre of the North Pacific Current. The crew marveled at her jury rig, a photo of which Marcos had snapped before leaving the Starlight. "That's sailor's work," he said, showing her the image on his phone. The spinnaker pole, lashed to the mast stump with halyards and spare lines, looked fragile but defiant, the storm jib taut against the wind. Sarah traced the photo with her finger, pride and loss mingling in her chest. In Honolulu, the Coast Guard met her at the dock, their questions sharp but kind. She recounted the storm, the mast failure, her navigation by sextant. They nodded, impressed, but their news about the Starlight was grim. A search had found no trace. The currents likely swept it beyond reach. Sarah's throat tightened, but she thanked them, her voice steady. She was alive, and that was enough for now. The hospital confirmed her injuries were healing, her concussion mild, her ribs bruised but knitting. They kept her overnight, the sterile room a stark contrast to the Starlight's cramped cabin. She clutched her logbook, its pages her only link to the journey. Back on land, the world felt alien. The noise of cars, the press of people, the weight of gravity, it overwhelmed her. Her family flew in, their hugs both comfort and pain against her ribs. They cried, laughed, asked questions she couldn't fully answer. How do you explain 47 days of solitude, of fighting the sea with nothing but a broken boat and your own will? She told them pieces, the dolphins that danced beside her, the stars she named, the moment she saw the freighter. But the rest stayed locked inside, a private language only the ocean understood. She rented a small apartment in Honolulu, unable to face the mainland yet. The Starlight haunted her. She contacted salvage companies, but the cost was astronomical and the odds slim. The boat was likely gone, swallowed by the Pacific's vastness. Yet she couldn't let go. She spent hours at the marina, watching other sailors rig their boats, their masts piercing the sky. She borrowed a dinghy one day, rowing out to where the harbor met the open sea, and scattered a handful of salt into the water, a quiet offering to the Starlight. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. The waves lapped against the dinghy, a gentle reply. Her logbook became her refuge. She read it obsessively, each entry a step back into the Starlight's world. Day 23. Caught a fish. Small, but it tasted like life. Day 35. Saw a ship too far. Waved anyway. The stars are brighter tonight. Day 47. They saw me. I'm going home. She began to write again, not just logs, but stories, piecing together the fragments of her journey. The sextant readings, shaky but determined, as she calculated latitude under a pitching sky. The jury rig, its spinnaker pole wobbling but holding, the storm jib catching just enough wind to keep her moving. The bilge pump, worked by hand until her arms burned, keeping the Starlight afloat despite the leaks. Each detail was a thread, weaving a tapestry of survival. She met other sailors at the marina, their faces lined with sun and salt. They knew her story. Word had spread, a whispered legend among the docks. "You sailed 47 days on a jury rig?" one asked, his eyes wide. She nodded, shy but proud, and showed them her logbook. They pored over it, marveling at her celestial fixes, her dead reckoning estimates despite the broken clock. "You should write a book," one said. Sarah laughed, but the idea took root. She began to type her story, her fingers hesitant at first, then fluid, the words pouring out like the sea itself. The storm, the mast crack, the dolphins, the hunger, the stars. They all came alive again, each sentence a reclamation of her time adrift. Her injuries healed, but the ocean stayed in her bones. She dreamed of waves, of the Starlight's creaking hull, of the sextant's brass gleaming under the sun. She took a job at a chandlery, selling rigging and charts, her hands tracing the same tools she'd used to survive. Customers asked about her journey, and she told them snippets, her voice soft but steady. "The sea doesn't care," she'd say, echoing her father, "but it makes you care." She saved every penny, her eyes on the horizon. She wanted another boat, not to replace the Starlight, but to honor it. A new sloop, maybe 38 feet, with a stronger mast, better rigging, a reliable engine. She'd sail again, not to prove anything, but because the ocean was part of her now. One evening she walked to the beach, the sand cool under her feet. The Pacific stretched before her, its surface calm but alive, hiding its power beneath the shimmer. She thought of the Starlight, somewhere out there, carried by currents she'd once fought to navigate. She imagined it ghosting along, its jury rig still catching the wind, a silent testament to their shared defiance. She pulled out her signaling mirror, the same one that had saved her, and angled it to catch the setting sun. A flash of light danced across the water, a fleeting signal to the sea. "I'm still here," she whispered. The waves answered, soft and eternal, and she felt the Starlight's spirit in their rhythm. Months later, she got a call from a salvage operator. They'd found a boat, battered but intact, drifting 800 miles west of Hawaii. The hull number matched the Starlight,